about coding text. Qualitative research requires that we take texts in their broadest sense, but more often than not words, and try and find the meanings within them. And to do this, we code them. So I want to do two separate things, and here I'm going to look at the theoretical side of it. And separately, I'm going to look at some worked examples of how we can do it with simple tools that we have ourselves. So again, this is a thing. It's a collection of stuff. It's notes. It's well thought out set of notes and ideas jotted down in a framework which allows people to put organization on them. It's actually from a particular life history research project. But it's the bundle of post-its organized and structured. You move them around and you work out which ones go together and what the clusters are and where the meaning is. Now, with text, this is an old example of coding an interview transcript. We get our texts for research from interviews, from publications, from speeches, from official documents, variety of sources. Of course, text now can mean more than just words, but here, this is an old example of interviews about why people go into politics. And it's the transcript, so the lines are numbered, there's some notes by the researcher on one side, and there's a coding system here, which codes the various variables. And I'm going to look at examples of coding systems later on. What happens with coding is there's a number of levels or sort of processes in coding. First of all, there's where you have the document and you do a first read through it. And you do open coding. So you note points of interest and you code as you go. As you note things you make up, you see what is emerging from the data, which is the classic grounded theory method of working. And from that you identify the sort of topics or themes that you're going to code, and it's quite loose. Focused coding is where you actually design the codes first. You've decided what you're looking for based on your research questions and you apply them. But it may be that as you go along you need to add more codes, something will emerge. Sometimes you'll do a first pass of open coding, and then having done that on a sample of the data, you'll then design some codes and do a more structured coding system to get through the rest of it. Different types of coding, right? It's important that you understand different things that you can identify in the data. There's simple descriptive stuff. Who, what, where, when. This simply identifies events. It identifies the sequence of events, the chronology, the setting, the names of people and places that are involved. This is useful, but it's not necessarily theoretically enough. Where it becomes theoretical is when you're looking for patterns or clusters of descriptive terms, where a set of events or people, by virtue of being in some relationship in the text, give you a clue about processes or issues that are important. So you can infer something from the co-location of different words or terms in the text. And then there's factor coding, which looks at the deeper issues like religion, politics, class, if you're looking at some sort of politics or social research, particular issues. And that's the more theoretical level, which is theoretically interesting. So this is an example of a coding system. It goes back to that previous interview from research interviews with Harold Wilson, Ted Heath, and a number of other British politicians in the 1960s. And these are the part of the coding system for the things that influenced them going into politics. So there was education. All the education codes begin with an E. And there are subcodes within that. There's family as an influence. There's religion. A lot of these codes are particular to the UK in the 1950s and 60s. They're not necessarily globally applicable, but these codes could be extended. You could add more religion codes, or you could add more education codes to take account of the educational system in other countries. So that's an example of coding for some very basic factual stuff. And that's it deployed here again in this example. where you're looking at the things. This is, we don't have to do it the hard way anymore. If you have a lot of money to spend, this is a modern computer-assisted qualitative data analysis package where you have the text in this window and you have a code manager, so you can select some text and click on the code manager and apply that code to that text. And you can't really see it very well here in this other pane behind the code manager, but different codes here apply to different parts of the text and they can overlap. So a particular piece of text can carry several different meanings and you can encode that. You can also, of course, now, this is a more recent version of the same software, encode things like audio or video. So you can attach coding tags to segments of an audio or a video clip. And then once you've done that, then you can start to take the research material apart. And you can break out the quotes, the relevant quotes that provide evidence, into themes like family, religion, education, life stages, events. This is from the 1960s political elites interviews again. And in some cases you can see that the same quote occurs in different columns because it refers to different themes and different influences. So once you've done that, of course, you can then reduce that to a certain extent to a visualization. And take it a step further and look at the size of the different, and you can actually visually express the extent of the different influences. In this case, this is a graph for the influences on Harold Wilson, who was the leader of the British Labour Party in the 1960s. And it shows the weighting of the different influences on his decisions to go into politics. So, not very surprisingly, Marx is very small, but education, religion, voluntary organizations, family members, the influence of growing up in the 1930s depression, all affect. And of course, once you apply the coding scheme to other interviews of people who've gone into politics, you could produce the same sort of analysis and compare them very quickly. So this is another way of coding, and it's very simple. It's an example from Karsten Knock's blog, where he has simply coded some text just by adding comments in Word. And each of these comments, which are all added by him, has a different theme on it. It's very basic. It's extremely simple. It's probably not hugely useful down the road because you've got to find some way to get these codes out and group them. But it is certainly very similar to the sort of annotation exercises that I do ask people to do at other times. This is almost the same thing in that this is a set of interviews, but this is in a data analysis package so that the various tags apply again here to different parts of the interview and they overlap in many cases, and these tools will have tools for then visualizing and seeing the relationships of these. This is also a way to do this coding easily. I'm going to show a worked example of this elsewhere, where you take the text, put it in a spreadsheet, Excel or a Google Sheet, and create a column for each of the codes. And these are color coded by, they're obviously grouped by areas. And then there are specific subcodes, and you just put a 1 in each box where the code exists here, where the issue exists or the theme exists in the text that you're coding. And that then allows you very easily to progress that to statistical analysis of the codes, of the distribution within the text of the different topics and ideas. So that's one way to do it. With sophisticated modern computer-assisted qualitative data analysis tools, this is one called MaxQDA, you can see the same thing. It can produce a graph of the same thing. It can also map the relationships between the different issues. And you can identify very quickly which issues are related and what the strength of those relationships are. So it makes the analysis very quick. It requires effort to put the data in and to code it. And of course, all of this software is quite expensive. And once you've done that, then you can start to produce interesting data visualizations that allow you to very quickly convey the meaning of the data, which is one of the things that coding is useful for. It's useful for seeing the rich picture of what's in the data. It's also very helpful for conveying that information quickly. So there is a process by which you can get from scads of text and or sources indeed, because it could be video, it could be audio, it could be images which are encoding, and how you can get from that and identify the themes and issues and get to powerful data visualizations that can then tell you the story of what the hidden meaning of those texts is. So that's basically some kind of theory or practice or behind the scenes understanding of why and how what text in coding and what coding in qualitative data analysis means. Separately, I'm going to take a couple of these techniques, well, one technique, the spreadsheet one, and a different one, and show you how to work through those on a piece of text. But in the interest of manageability, we're going to keep these as separate videos.